The scent of wilting lilies and carnations, a cloying funereal perfume, clung to the air in the house. It was the smell of a life concluded, and Ellen Carmichael felt it in the back of her throat with every breath. It had been 2 days since they buried Thomas, and the silence he left behind was a physical presence, heavier than any sound. It had weight and texture, pooling in the deep leather impression of his armchair and settling like a fine dust on his side of the bed, the sheets still holding a faint, ghostly trace of his scent. The entryway, where he'd always dropped his keys into a small ceramic bowl with a satisfying clink, was now a tableau of stillness. The bowl was empty. The entire house in their quiet centennial, Colorado suburb, once vibrant with the easy rhythm of their shared life, felt like a hollowed-out cavern, echoing with nothing. Ellen and her 17-year-old daughter, Hannah, moved through it like ghosts. Hannah had retreated into a fortress of teenage angst and sorrow, the door to her room perpetually closed, the sound of muffled music a constant, low thrum. When she did emerge, her eyes were puffy and rimmed with red, her expression a careful blankness that broke Ellen's heart, more than tears would have. "Mom, have you seen my black hoodie?" she'd asked earlier, her voice flat, and the mundane question felt so grotesquely normal it was like a slap. They were adrift on the same ocean of grief, but in separate, unreachable lifeboats. A tentative knock at the door signaled the arrival of their neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman with worried eyes, holding a foil-covered casserole dish. "Oh, Ellen, dear," she began, her voice trembling with sympathy. "I just don't have the words. He was such a good man. If there's anything, and I mean anything at all." Ellen accepted the dish with numb hands, murmuring thanks, her social reflexes running on fumes. She wanted to scream that there was nothing, that the only thing she needed was for the world to rewind itself a week, but she just nodded. Just as Mrs. Gable was leaving, a familiar silver sedan pulled into the driveway. The doorbell, when it rang again, was not tentative but firm, a confident chime that cut through the stillness. It was her sister. Pamela Dunn, younger by 5 years, blew in not with the hesitant sorrow of other visitors, but with a gust of brisk, purposeful energy. Her arms were full of grocery bags, her expression a mask of determined sympathy. "Ellen, you shouldn't be alone," she announced, bustling past her into the kitchen as if she were reclaiming territory. "I'm staying, for as long as you need me. Don't you or Hannah worry about a single thing?" Ellen, who had been unable to contemplate the logistics of making toast, felt a wave of profound, bone-deep relief wash over her. She watched as Pam began unpacking groceries. Coffee, bread, milk, things that represented a future Ellen couldn't yet imagine. Her movements were crisp and efficient. She took the casserole from Ellen's hands and put it in the fridge, her voice a low, soothing murmur as she shooed a well-meaning relative off the phone. "They're resting now, David," Pam had said firmly but kindly. "I'm here. I'll take care of everything. I'll let them know you called." Pam was building a wall around their grief, a fortress of competence. Ellen sank onto a kitchen chair, the first tears she'd shed all day finally tracing hot paths down her cheeks. Not just from sorrow, but from the sheer exhaustion of it all. Pam was here. Pam, who always knew how to take charge, would handle it. Weeks bled into a month, and Pam's presence became the new architecture of their lives. She was the sun around which their broken little planet now revolved. The guest room was transformed into her command center, a space of neat stacks of paper, meticulously organized files, and a laptop that was always open to a spreadsheet. It was Pam who sat on the phone for hours with the life insurance company from Thomas's work, her voice a masterclass in patient persistence. "Yes, I understand it's a process," she'd say, "but my sister is in no state to handle this. I'm her legal proxy." She presented Ellen with the paperwork, pointing to where she needed to sign, her explanations clear and concise. "This is just for Thomas's policy through his employer, Elle. It will help with the mortgage and keep you and Hannah afloat." Ellen, grateful to be spared the bureaucratic nightmare, signed without reading, her mind too foggy to absorb the details. The house itself began to change. Under Pam's care, it became cleaner, more organized, and somehow more sterile. The comforting clutter of Thomas's life, the stack of magazines by his chair, The worn-out running shoes by the back door disappeared, replaced by a minimalist order. Pam cooked savory, comforting meals that filled the house with the scent of rosemary and thyme, a welcome replacement for the dying flowers. She intercepted the mail, filtered the phone calls, and allowed Ellen and Hannah the precious, necessary space to simply exist in their sorrow. "My poor sister," Ellen heard her murmur to a friend on the phone once, her voice thick with staged emotion. "She's just shattered, absolutely shattered. I have to be strong for them." One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a wave of nostalgia sent Ellen searching for her mother's old silver locket. It wasn't particularly valuable, but Thomas had had the delicate chain repaired for their 20th anniversary, a surprise that had made her cry with happiness. It was a tangible link to both her mother and her husband. She rummaged through her jewelry box, her drawers, the small dish on her nightstand where she kept her daily adornments. But it was gone. A small, sharp pang of loss, another tiny piece of her history erased, felt disproportionately painful. "Pam?" she called out, her voice thin. "Have you seen my mother's locket? The silver one with the little rose on it?" Pam came into the bedroom, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wrapped an arm around Ellen's shoulders, her expression full of practiced pity. "Oh, honey, no, I haven't," she said softly. "Are you sure you know where you last had it? With all the people in and out of the house after the service, it was such chaos. Things get misplaced." She offered to help look, a perfunctory search through the same drawers Ellen had already checked. "Don't you worry your head about it," Pam soothed, guiding Ellen back to the living room. "It's probably just tucked away somewhere safe. We'll find it when things settle down." Ellen nodded, feeling foolish for getting upset over an object when her husband was gone. Her gratitude for her sister swelled, silencing the small wounded part of her. "I don't know what I would do without you, Pam," Ellen whispered, leaning her head on her sister's shoulder. Pam squeezed her tightly. "That's what family is for." As the raw, gaping wound of grief began to slowly scar over, leaving a dull, permanent ache, Ellen started to notice things. They were small moments at first, tiny dissonances in the symphony of Pam's perfect support, easily dismissed. A flicker of impatience in her sister's eyes when Ellen spent too long telling a story about Thomas. The way Pam would quickly change the subject from wistful reminiscence to practical matters, like utility bills or car insurance. It was the mail, however, that first pricked Ellen's subconscious with a real sense of unease. Pam was always the first one to the mailbox at the end of the long driveway, sorting through the envelopes at the kitchen counter before Ellen ever saw them. One afternoon, Ellen was expecting a condolence letter from a dear college friend she'd reconnected with. "Did anything come from Sarah Jenkins today?" she asked. Pam, flipping through the stack, shook her head. "No, mostly bills and junk. I'll keep an eye out." Later that evening, while taking out the recycling, Ellen saw the corner of a familiar lavender envelope sticking out from under a pile of newspapers. It was from Sarah. It had been opened. When she confronted her, Pam was a whirlwind of apology. "Oh my God, Ellen, I am so sorry. It didn't have a return address. I thought it was another one of those solicitations from a funeral home. My mind is just mush these days, trying to keep track of everything." The excuse was plausible, perfect even. But the image of the opened letter in the trash lingered. The unease sharpened with the introduction of Hannah's quiet observations. Her daughter, emerging slowly from her cocoon of grief, was seeing things with fresh eyes. "Aunt Pam is always on her phone," Hannah commented one evening, scrolling through her own. "And she's always on those real estate websites. I saw her looking at houses in Florida." Ellen felt a defensive instinct kick in. "She's just stressed, honey. Probably just needs a distraction." But the comment lodged itself next to the memory of the open letter. The real tremor, the one that truly shook her, came on a Sunday. They were sitting on the back deck, looking out at the distant, hazy outline of the Rocky Mountains, a view Thomas had adored. "He put so much work into this place," Ellen said wistfully, tracing the rim of her glass. "The garden, the deck, he loved it here." Pam nodded, her gaze sweeping across the half-acre lot. "He sure did," she said. Then she pulled out her tablet, her fingers tapping on the screen. "You know, I was just curious," she began, her tone casual. "So I looked up your address on Zillow." She angled the screen toward Ellen. The estimated value of the house glowed in a large, bold font. This place must be worth a fortune now, especially with the market in Centennial. You're sitting on a gold mine, Elle. Seriously. If you ever decided to sell, you could downsize, bank a huge profit. You wouldn't have to worry about money ever again. The words, and the glint in Pam's eye as she said them, struck Ellen as profoundly wrong. It wasn't a comforting observation. It felt cold, appraising. It was the way a financial advisor might talk, not a grieving sister. The phrase, unlocking equity, hung in the air, a horribly corporate sentiment in the sacred space of her memory. She pushed the feeling down, chiding herself. Pam was just being practical. She was worried about them. It had to be that. But the seed of doubt, once planted, had taken root, a tiny, unsettling weed in the garden of her gratitude. The idea for a memory board came to Ellen in a quiet moment of clarity. She was tired of the silence, of the careful way everyone tiptoed around Thomas's name. She wanted to see his smile again, to surround herself and Hannah with physical proof of the vibrant, happy life they had built together. She remembered a large, sturdy box of old photo albums, chronicling their life from their wedding day to their last family vacation, stored in the back of the guest room closet, now Pam's room. She knocked softly on the door. There was no answer. Pam had gone to run errands, a long, self-important list of them that she'd announced at breakfast. Ellen pushed the door open. The room was sterile, tidy, the bed made with military precision. It held none of the personal clutter that defined the rest of the house. It was as anonymous as a hotel room. She opened the closet, the scent of Pam's perfume hitting her. She pulled down boxes of old linens and winter clothes, her frustration growing as she dug deeper. The albums weren't there. Annoyed, she knelt, thinking they might have been pushed under the bed. Her hand swept through the dust bunnies and brushed against something hard, cold, and metallic. Frowning, she crouched lower, pulling it out into the light. It was a metal lockbox, a simple fireproof one you could buy at any office supply store. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Thomas's. It was completely foreign. A strange, insistent pulse began to beat in her temples. This was Pam's room, so this must be Pam's box. But what was in it? And why was it hidden under the bed? A frantic search of the desk drawers yielded no key. Her heart was pounding now, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and a feeling she couldn't name, a mix of dread and furious curiosity, she carried the heavy box to the garage. Her hands shook as she found a sturdy flathead screwdriver. Back in the guest room, she closed the door, her breath held tight in her chest. She wedged the metal tip into the seam where the lid met the base and pried with all her strength. The lock resisted, then popped with a sickening crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. Ellen lifted the lid, her breath catching in a painful gasp. The first thing she saw, nestled on a bed of official-looking papers, was the familiar silver gleam of her mother's locket. It lay there like an accusation. Beside it, winking in the dim light, was a pair of her own diamond stud earrings she thought she had lost over a year ago. A cold dread, icy and swift, washed over her. Her sister was a thief. She lifted the jewelry out, her fingers numb, and looked at the papers beneath. The top document was thick, bound with a staple. It was a life insurance policy. Her eyes scanned the page, her brain struggling to process the words. Policyholder, Thomas Carmichael. Payout, $500,000. And then, the line that made the world tilt on its axis. Sole beneficiary, Pamela Dunn. Underneath that policy, folded into a neat, tight square, was a greasy, carbon copy receipt from a mechanic shop. She unfolded it. The paper felt slick and wrong in her hands. Ellen's hands trembled so violently she could barely hold the mechanic's receipt steady. The world narrowed to the flimsy piece of paper in her lap, the blue ink of the carbon copy stark against the white. It was from a garage called Precision Auto, a place on the other side of town she'd never even heard of. The date printed at the top was 1 week, 7 precise days, before the fatal car crash. The description of services was chillingly clear, a death sentence written in detached mechanical terms. Customer reports soft brake pedal. Inspection finds critical brake fluid leak in primary line. Strong recommendation for immediate replacement of brake line. Customer declined service. The words swam before her eyes. Customer declined service. It was an impossibility, a tear in the fabric of reality. Thomas, the man who checked their tire pressure before every family road trip, who taught Hannah how to check her oil, who replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors on the 1st of every January and July without fail, had declined to fix a critical brake failure. He would have sooner cut off his own arm. It was a lie. And the life insurance policy, the one for $500,000 taken out just 6 months ago, was the reason for that lie. The air in the room grew thin. She felt like she was suffocating. The room began to spin, and she gripped the edge of the bed to steady herself. Every act of kindness from Pam over the past month replayed in her mind, now twisted into a monstrous, grotesque performance. The comforting meals were a way to keep her docile and dependent. The handling of the mail was to intercept any evidence that might expose the truth. The sympathetic looks were a cover for a thief and a predator. The truth. She remembered conversations from before the accident, fragments that now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Pam complaining about her credit card debt. Pam making a bitter joke about how Thomas had all the luck. Pam asking casual, probing questions about Thomas's commute. This wasn't a passive crime. This was active. Pam hadn't just allowed Thomas to die. She had discovered a vulnerability, a weakness in his car, and had seen not a danger to be fixed, but an opportunity to be exploited. She had watched him drive away in a death trap, knowing his brakes could fail at any moment, counting the days until she could cash in on his death. A cold, hard fury began to burn through the fog of shock, cauterizing the wound of her grief into something sharper, harder. This wasn't just about money. This was about a profound and terrifying jealousy that had festered in her sister's heart for years. She had to get out of the room, had to breathe air that wasn't tainted by this discovery. She carefully placed the receipt and the policy back in the box, took her stolen jewelry, and went to her own bathroom, hiding the items deep in her closet. She splashed her face with cold water, staring at the stranger in the mirror, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terrible new knowledge. Downstairs, she heard the front door open and close. "Ellen, I'm home," Pam called out cheerfully. "I brought that chicken noodle soup you like from the deli." Ellen closed her eyes, her hand gripping the cold marble countertop. She had to go downstairs. She had to sit across the table from her husband's killer and pretend everything was normal. That night, sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. She lay perfectly still beside the vast, empty space where her husband used to sleep, the lockbox's contents a toxic secret pulsing in the dark of her closet. Every creak of the old house, every distant siren, sent a jolt of pure terror through her. Around 2 a.m., she heard the floorboards in the hallway groan. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard the soft pad of footsteps going downstairs, the click of the refrigerator opening, the sound of water running. It was just Pam getting a drink, a normal, innocuous act that now seemed sinister. Was she checking on Ellen? Did she suspect something? The sister she had known her whole life had been replaced by a dangerous stranger sleeping just down the hall. The sleepless night gave way to a strained, surreal morning. The tension at the breakfast table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Pam was her usual bustling self, chattering about her plans for the day. Ellen forced herself to drink the coffee her sister made, the bitter liquid churning in her stomach with a mixture of fear and revulsion. Hannah, perceptive as ever, picked up on the shift immediately. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you saw a ghost." Ellen forced a weak smile. "Just a bad night's sleep, sweetie." She could feel Pam's sharp, inquisitive gaze on her. She had to get out. "I think I'm going to run to the pharmacy," Ellen announced, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need a refill on my prescription." Pam, ever the caregiver, immediately offered to go for her. "Of course, you rest. Just give me the details." "No," Ellen said, perhaps too quickly. "No, the fresh air will do me good. I need to get out of the house for a bit." She grabbed her purse, the damning envelope containing the photocopied policy, and the original receipt tucked inside, hidden beneath her wallet. The drive to the police station was a blur. The familiar suburban scenery of Centennial seemed alien, like a set from a movie. Her internal debate raged. Am I doing the right thing? Am I destroying what's left of my family? What if I'm wrong? But the evidence was cold, hard, and undeniable. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated plot. Inside the sterile, quiet building, she sat across a worn wooden desk from a calm, dark-haired man named Detective Harrison. His empathetic expression was standard issue for dealing with grieving families. With trembling hands, she pushed the envelope across the desk. "My husband, Thomas Carmichael, died in a car accident last month," she began, her voice cracking on his name. I think my sister let it happen. I think she knew his car was unsafe." Detective Harrison listened without interruption, his professional sympathy slowly sharpening into focused attention as he examined the documents. He read the insurance policy, his eyes lingering on the beneficiary's name and the date. He unfolded the greasy mechanic's receipt, his expression hardening. He asked a series of probing questions. "When did your sister move in? Did she ever mention financial trouble? Can you describe your husband's usual habits regarding vehicle maintenance?" Each answer Ellen gave seemed to solidify the dark picture. Finally, he looked up from the papers, his gaze direct and serious. "Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his voice low, "we're going to look into this. We'll be very discreet. Your safety is our primary concern. Please go home and try to act as normally as possible. Do not confront her." For the first time in 24 hours, Ellen felt she could take a full, deep breath. The weight was excruciating. The next 36 hours were a masterclass in deception for Ellen. She moved through her days in a state of high alert, every cheerful comment from Pam grating on her raw nerves. She helped with dinner, feigned interest in a television show, and answered questions about her well-being with hollow reassurances. The call from Detective Harrison came on a Tuesday afternoon while Pam was in the shower. "We've confirmed the authenticity of the documents, Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his voice a calm anchor in her sea of anxiety. "The mechanic, a Mr. Henderson, remembers the vehicle and the customer, a woman matching your sister's description, not your husband's. He's willing to testify that she was adamant about not having the work done, even after his warnings. We've also pulled her financial records. She has significant credit card debt and recently defaulted on a personal loan. We have enough to proceed." The plan was simple. He and a partner would arrive in an unmarked car, under the pretense of asking a few final follow-up questions about the accident report. Ellen's role was just to let them in. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she hung up the phone. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Harrison and a uniformed officer. Her hand trembled as she turned the deadbolt. Pam came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face a perfect mask of helpful concern. "Detectives," she said, her voice warm. "Is everything all right? Please, come in." Ellen led them into the living room. Hannah was upstairs in her room, for which Ellen sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Pam offered them coffee, the perfect hostess. "Anything we can do to help," she said, settling onto the edge of the sofa. "This has just been so hard on my poor sister." Detective Harrison began calmly. "We just had a question about Mr. Carmichael's life insurance for the final report. Mrs. Carmichael, you're the sole beneficiary of his work policy, is that correct?" Ellen met his gaze and nodded numbly. Before she could speak, Pam interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "Yes, that's right. It's all been so overwhelming, the silk. I've been helping Ellen sort through all the paperwork. It's a real blessing he had that coverage." Detective Harrison gave a slight nod, then turned his full attention to Pam. "That's very helpful of you, Miss Dunn. So helpful, in fact, that you decided to take out your own policy on him." He slid a clear plastic evidence bag onto the coffee table. Inside was the policy from the lockbox. Pam stared at it, the color draining from her face. I don't know what that is." "And I suppose you don't know anything about this either," Harrison continued, placing a second evidence bag beside the first. It contained the mechanic's receipt. Pam's mask of composure didn't just slip, it shattered. That's fake. She's lying," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Ellen. "She's confused. She's grieving. She's making things up." "Ellen, tell them!" Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch as the uniformed officer stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. Pamela Dunn, you are under arrest for insurance fraud and investigation of your involvement in the death of Thomas Carmichael." "No, you can't!" Pam screamed, a raw animal sound of pure rage. She shot a look at Ellen, and in her eyes was not confusion or fear, but a cold, bottomless well of hatred. The click of the handcuffs was a sharp, metallic sound that echoed in the sudden silence, a definitive end to the monstrous performance. In the immediate aftermath of the arrest, the house was plunged into a new kind of chaos. The phone began ringing incessantly as news of Pam's arrest rippled through their family and friends, a shockwave of disbelief and scandal. The most difficult conversation was with Hannah, who had come downstairs to the sight of her aunt being led away in a police car. In the living room, surrounded by the remnants of their shattered reality, Ellen had to explain the full, ugly truth. She watched her daughter's face crumble as she laid out the story of the lockbox, the insurance policy, and the faulty brakes. It was a second, brutal bereavement, the loss of not just an aunt, but of the belief in the safety of their world. But in the weeks that followed, as Pam remained in jail, denied bail, the house began to breathe again. The oppressive, grief-stricken silence was replaced by a peaceful stillness. Ellen met with the district attorney, a compassionate woman who confirmed the strength of the case. The mechanic's testimony was solid. Pam's financial records painted a clear picture of desperation, and they had even found security footage from the auto shop, clearly showing Pam, not Thomas, talking to the mechanic and driving the car away. The community in Centennial, once fooled by Pam's act, now rallied around Ellen and Hannah with a genuine compassion that was humbling. Casseroles appeared on their doorstep again, but this time they were left by friends who expected nothing in return, who simply wanted to help. One of the first things Ellen did was reclaim the guest room. She and Hannah worked together, stripping the bed, boxing up the few belongings Pam had left behind, and donating them. They opened the windows wide, letting the fresh Colorado air chase away the last vestiges of her sister's cloying perfume. It was a cleansing, a symbolic exorcism. They started talking to a grief counselor, learning to navigate the complex new landscape of their sorrow, one that was now tangled with the thorns of betrayal. A few months later, on a bright Saturday morning, Ellen found the box of photo albums in the trunk of her own car, where she'd hidden them after finding the lockbox. She brought them inside and spread them across the dining room table. For hours, she and Hannah went through the pictures, laughing at bad haircuts, crying at wedding photos, and sharing stories of the man they both missed so fiercely. Together, they built the memory board. As Ellen pinned up a photo of Thomas, his face alight with a huge, joyful smile from a long-ago beach vacation, she felt not just the sharp ache of his absence, but the profound, enduring warmth of his love. That evening, for the first time since the accident, Ellen and Hannah baked Thomas's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The sweet, buttery scent filled the kitchen, a warm and loving fragrance that finally, definitively, chased away the last of the phantom lilies. The future was still an unknown country, but they would face it together, hand in hand, rebuilding their lives not on a foundation of lies, but on the unwavering, brilliant light of the man they had both loved and lost.